Well, good morning, everybody. That wasn't good. Come on. Good morning. Are you awake? You're liars, but that's okay. What I thought I'd do this morning is give you a sort of an overview, a report from the front on the good, bad, and yes, the ugly of what's going on in the travel industry these days, how you can adjust, how you can survive, and how you can succeed based on some things that you can't even control half the time. But let's just start with some really good news. Think about this figure. Last year, more than 1 billion people crossed an international border. 1 billion. Yeah, you can applaud, but it's about to get better. That represented 52 million more people than 2012, and this year, 70 million new first-time travelers are going to cross another border. That is remarkable. It gives you an idea of why travel is the largest industry in the world. It's 1 of every 10 jobs. It's 10% of global GDP, and it keeps getting bigger. By the way, that means it also is front-page news. So let's talk about that. I'm going to talk about the airlines, the hotels, the cruise lines, the rental car business. Some of it good news, some of it not. Some of it that appeals or applies to you as operators, and a lot of it that applies and appeals to you as consumers. The airlines. Let's talk about one piece of really good news. It was the best year in air safety in over 13 years. Yes, definitely needs applause. But I'm going to put that in perspective. In 2013, there were 29 accidents and only 265 fatalities. That's it. That's out of 31 million flights. That is unbelievable. Of course, our challenge is that we can't improve on that. We really have to work hard to maintain that, and that's an entirely different speech for an entirely different time, but that is all good news. Now, if you happen to be an airline CEO or a shareholder, it was really good news last year. Record profits. Airlines are not used to making profits. In fact, airlines have not returned their capital investment since the Wright brothers, and that's not a joke. That is a fact. So last year was an amazing year for them, but of course, how did they make their money? Ancillary fees, billions in bag fees, billions in ticket change fees. In fact, one airline, their fee for ticket changes now can be as high as $400 a ticket. That's right. Hotels, back to pre-recession levels in terms of new builds and occupancy. Rental car companies, because of some consolidations and mergers, also doing well. And the cruise lines, for the first time in about 7 years, starting to make a turn for the better after a pretty bad year 2 years ago. But let's not forget, we live in a world where people are still trying to be competitive on rate, and they're not being competitive on value. That's a mistake. Because your clients, your audience, my audience, they figured it out. And we don't like nickel and diming anymore. Well, we never did, but we've never seen it to the extent that we're having it now. For example, last week, and by the way, I'm not shy, I'll name names. Last week, we're just getting started. Last week, I was in Orlando at the Waldorf Astoria, which is next to the Hilton there. They're both together. And for many of you, you know this, for me, I don't believe that there's anything other than 2 kinds of airline bags, carry-on and lost. So for the last 9 years, I courier my bags. I FedEx them or use UPS. And there's always somewhere in the world bags traveling to meet me or traveling from me. When I got to the hotel, I knew there was a bag waiting. Usually it's in my room. Not this time. I called down to the front desk and said, hey, let me talk to a bellman. I know that I have a bag here. Can you deliver it? He says, oh, I'm not allowed to deliver it. Not allowed to deliver it? Really, a new rule. Who can deliver it? Oh, the people who run FedEx at the hotel. Who's that? Well, they're going to have to deliver it. So they did. What do you think they charged me to walk 800 yards? $35 to deliver the bag, which was more than I spent to FedEx it from Los Angeles to Orlando. When I held up the receipt on my next television show, they offered to waive the charge, and I said, you can waive it if you waive it for everybody. The last time I spoke to NTA was in Houston. Does anybody remember that experience with nickel and diming? I'll remind you. It was at the Hyatt Regency, and I love when hotels do this, and you've all experienced this, right? They'll say to you, You've received a FedEx package. Would you like us to deliver it? No, share it with the other guests. I mean, and I'm at the front desk when they tell me this. So the bellman comes over. He delivers me it was just a box. I tipped him $5. And the next day when I checked out, I was charged $10 for the delivery of a FedEx package. Then in the days when we used to have faxes, do we all remember that? Okay. They would charge you for the delivery of a fax. We're living in the world of ancillary fees. The hotels have taken their cue from the airlines, and it seems as if their entire motto these days is we're not happy until you're not happy. But everybody in this room can vote on that. You get to vote with your wallets. Maybe. Because let me go back to the airlines for a second. Remember I said that's the first time since the Wright brothers they've made a real profit? It's true. It's also the first time they've flown this full since 1945. How many people here came out on an empty flight? I rest my case. In fact, I'm going to give you some bad news. It's not about adding flights these days. It's about cutting capacity. The airlines are no longer fighting for traffic they never wanted in the first place. And this is really going to impact your business. Last year, nearly 4,000 flights in this country were taken off the schedules permanently. And every time you read a story about airline mergers, you won't be reading many more because I think we've finished with that. But every time you either have Delta, Northwest, or Continental United, or now most recently American and US Air, what's the first thing they announce? We're now the largest airline in the world. Yeah, that lasts for about 15 minutes. And then what do? They shrink. And that's what's happening. And it's about airlift, ladies and gentlemen. If people can't get to you, you're out of business. That applies to the motor coach operators, the tour operators, it applies to the hotels, everybody in that chain. And the airlines, when I say they're no longer fighting for traffic they don't want, that applies directly to the United States. American Airlines right now flies to 7 cities in Brazil. They make more money from those 7 flights than they make from their entire domestic route system combined. I heard a wow. Okay, we're making progress here. Do the math. That's what's going on. And in an economic downturn, the 3 cities that get hit the hardest are the cities whose flights are always full. Orlando, Las Vegas, and Hawaii. Why? Because it's all leisure traffic, not high yield. They're all going for high yield from those BRIC countries. And it's not just Brazil, Russia, India, and China. Let's add a K to that. It's also Korea. That's where they're emphasizing their flights. In fact, the largest international airline in this country that flies to more cities and from more cities than any other carrier will surprise you. It's Korean Airlines, and nobody knows. Okay, so the airlines are flying full, but what does that mean for you? Well, for starters, assuming you can get on a plane, and assuming you can get on a plane in a city you want to fly from, airfares this year are up 14% over last year. That is huge. That's staggering, and it's not going to go away. Hotel rates are up. Rental car rates are up because the rental car companies followed the lead of the airlines, and they shrunk their fleet. So the law of supply and demand kicks in. Guess what happens? Fares go up. But now it gets even worse, because if you're the mayor of Cincinnati, Cleveland, Memphis, St. Louis, Phoenix, Milwaukee, Kansas City, I can keep going, Charlotte, Pittsburgh, you got a problem, because the airlines are closing hubs. You're not going to believe this until I give you this number. It's a pretty staggering number. In the last 6 years, the airlines have closed, did you hear me, closed 18 hubs in this country. You saw the recent news about United in Cleveland. Let me give you some real numbers. 2 years ago, there were 800 departures a day in Cincinnati. It's now down to 190. When American took over TWA back in 2000, right, that seems eons ago, you remember the motto? 2 great airlines, 1 great future. Really? No. In fact, the people in St. Louis are so excited by it, they built a 3rd runway. You can go bowling on that runway now. They don't even use it. And the dominant carrier in St. Louis, for those people who are from St. Louis, you already know the answer to this, is Southwest, which is no longer the low-fare carrier. In fact, if you compare Southwest Airlines fares on routes where they compete against the legacy carriers, they're as expensive, if not more expensive. Well, let's take a look at what happened now in Memphis. When Delta merged with Northwest, Delta made a bold statement, we're not going to mess with Memphis. Well, they did. Service to Memphis is down 65% now. Cleveland, which United Airlines just announced they were pulling out of as a hub 10 days ago, has gone from like 200 flights a day down to 72. Now, there's a solution to this, but the solution rests with you, not the airlines. Because in the old days, by the way, that was 3 weeks ago, in the old days, if an airline decided not to fly somewhere, what would happen? Everybody would go begging to Southwest, please fly here, because the Southwest model was, we'll come in, fares will drop 43%, and it's a win-win for everybody. Can somebody tell me how many new routes Southwest Airlines added last year? Who said 0? You're wrong. It was minus 16. Minus 16. Because when they took over AirTran, those routes got ended in a lot of cities. So there are no saviors out there. So here's what you're confronted with. You're confronted with, and it's going to happen over and over again, a drop in capacity that's not being refilled. There's not an airline out there that I know of that's either sufficiently capitalized or motivated to come in there and fill that lost capacity. So now, are you ready for some good news? Okay. I don't have any. No, kidding. Here's the good news. The fastest rising segment in the travel and transportation industry is buses. Now, I may be preaching to the converted here, but when I tell this number to my friends, they are astounded. Because when we think of intercity bus lines, we're thinking of Greyhound or Continental Trailways or Peter Pan, some of the more, iconic brands. And the traditional stereotypical definition of a bus, let's call it what most people think, is George Raft is driving, you've got a drifter next to you drooling, and it's 3 in the morning. Well, as you all know, that has changed. Now you've got brand new buses, brand new routes, affordable fares, leather seats, Wi-Fi, lounges. Buses have become both an economically and a logistically viable alternative on trips of under 400 miles. And it's a good thing because we can't depend on the trains, which is sad in this country. It's an embarrassment. And when everybody talks about high-speed rail, Robert Crandall, the former chairman of American, said something pretty bold for a former chairman of an airline, but he was right. He said if we had high-speed rail in the corridors between New York and Washington, New York and Boston, LA and San Diego, LA and San Francisco, Chicago, and about 5 other cities, we would eliminate all airline delays. Now, if Amtrak tells you they have high-speed rail, they're on crack. Amtrak's Acela gets up to 86 miles an hour for only 29 miles. If it got to 86 miles an hour on the 30th mile, it would derail because the quality of the tracks is disgusting. And Amtrak can't fix it. You know why? Because they don't own the tracks. The tracks are owned by the freight lines, which is why Amtrak can't maintain an on-time performance because they're always pulling off to a siding while some 100-car freight train comes lumbering on by. It's a disgrace. We need high-speed rail, but you know what? We're not going to have it tomorrow. That's where buses come in. But then there's a flip side to that, and that's the infrastructure of this country's highway and bridge system. It's disgusting. This is where you come in. You need to lobby your elected representatives to prove to them, as Dwight Eisenhower once said, America didn't build the interstate highway system. The interstate highway system built America. And it's time for us to do those roads, the state roads, the bridges, the local highways, because that's what we're going to be using. You know, every year I have an issue with AAA. And here's my issue with AAA, and you see it all the time, and our networks report it. All the networks report it. They do it at Memorial Day, Labor Day, July 4th, Christmas, Thanksgiving. What is it? This year, fewer Americans will be on the highways, say the AAA. Really? I always go back to the AAA and say, how did you come up with that figure? You know what they tell me? They counted the number of cars. That's absurd. Did you count the number of people in the cars? Because here's the bottom line about Americans. We love to travel. We can't be denied. That's why things are back. It's not a question of when we're going to travel, or if, or whether. It's a question of how. And guess what? We will get back on the road. We may have the entire Clampett family in there with Granny strapped on the roof, but we are going. And we will get there. And that's where you come in, because you provide that service. But then the question is, how do you provide that service? And here's the issue. There are two things that we have to deal with here. How you provide that service, and still we have to go back to airlift. Because let's go back to those airports that have been so negatively affected. I mentioned some of them, but there are more. And by the way, anybody here from Phoenix? Control your enthusiasm. Remember what Delta said about Memphis? US Air just said it about Phoenix. I would not be a bit surprised to see that hub decimated as well. It becomes a flyover city. And one of the reasons why the airlines say this and then do something else is because they run their own numbers. How much originating traffic is coming out of Phoenix to support it as a hub? And the answer is maybe not enough. So for those people who I mentioned and who live in the cities that I've mentioned, this is where you get a chance to take over your own airlift. And how do you do that? You get to take control. I'll give you the example. Is anybody here from Wichita? Ooh, more than Phoenix, okay. Then you know what I'm about to tell you. A couple of years ago, the people in Wichita paid the highest average fare to go anywhere in the United States. It was something like $435 to go anywhere. It was ridiculous. And they ran, like everybody else did, to Southwest Airlines and said, would you please come in? And Southwest studied the market and turned them down. You know why? Because Southwest already had 25% of the Wichita market because people were driving 200 miles to another city where Southwest flew. So they turned them down. Was Wichita out of luck? They were not. They came up with an idea that was brilliant. They went to the other airline that now was taken over by Southwest, AirTran, and said, we're going to make you an offer you can't refuse. And here's the offer. We're going to put up, with business money and matching state money, about $3 or $4 million, and we're going to put it in escrow. And then we're going to guarantee you that we're only going to buy tickets on AirTran, and we're going to guarantee you that your planes will be 66% full at all times. And if they're not, you can dip into the escrow fund. So you cannot lose. AirTran said, let us study that, and 10 seconds later said, we're in. Guess what? Airfares dropped in Wichita, and everybody was happy, and they never touched the fund. Now, you can imagine the mayor of Wichita going nuts when Southwest Airlines said they were taking over AirTran. Guess what? They're getting so much traffic there, Southwest is staying. So there is hope, but you can't wait. If you're in Milwaukee, you can't wait. If you're in Kansas City, you can't wait. If you're in Phoenix, you can't wait. You need to start making those deals now, because otherwise people literally either can't get there or they can't afford to get there, and that's a problem. So now, let's put that on hold and talk about silver linings here. The silver linings have nothing to do with the American market. It's the foreign travelers. Remember those 1 billion people? For 10 years, the United States was considered inhospitable, not welcoming. As Roger Dow at USTA likes to say, it was a lost decade, and he can prove it with the numbers and the jobs lost and the income that just evaporated. Well, finally, we're marketing the United States. Finally. And we're doing a pretty good job. And for the first time in at least 6 or 7 years, people are actually coming here. Now, how are they coming here? They're coming here on airlines that have decided that the next place they want to fly is the US. So the Gulf carriers, for example, Emirates, Qatar, Etihad, they're giving Korean Airlines a run for their money. They're flying every day in LA right now, Emirates flies an A380 to LAX, and they fill the plane. Etihad is coming here in 2 months. Qatar is coming by the end of the year. They're also in Dallas and Boston and Miami and Washington and Chicago and New York. And they're not taking all these people from the Emirates. They're taking them through the Emirates. They're looking at the Emirates or Qatar, meaning Doha, or Abu Dhabi as a hub. And it's working. And that's really where you have to start thinking outside the box and how you attract your customers and how you get them and how you keep them. You have to stop thinking one-dimensionally. You have to stop thinking point to point. You have to stop thinking as a one-dimensional destination promotion. If you want to go from New York to London, You can fly on British Airways and American and many other carriers, even Air India. But it's an expensive airfare. So a couple of airlines got smart. You know what the best way to fly from New York to London is? On Turkish Airlines through Istanbul. Now, that's counterintuitive, may not make any sense, but let me put it in perspective. The flight from New York to Istanbul is $300 less. I'm talking to London with a stop in Istanbul. $300 less. It gets in at 6 in the morning, and the flight from Istanbul to London is at 6 in the evening. You get a free day in Istanbul, and you save $300. Have to start thinking outside the box. You want to go from Los Angeles to Hawaii? That's an expensive ticket. How about Los Angeles, Las Vegas, Hawaii? Los Angeles, Phoenix, Hawaii? Start thinking outside the box. And by doing that, you get to market 2 destinations. Jordan wanted people to visit Jordan. So what do? They realized that most people wanted to go to Israel. So they started marketing on Royal Jordanian flights to Israel via Amman. You flew to Amman, had 3 days there, and then drove across the Allenby Bridge to Israel. They undercut El Al, drove them nuts. But that's how a lot of people who otherwise never would have gone saw 2 countries. It's being done here in the United States, especially in terms of motor coaches. They developed in Oregon something called the Pacific Wine Trail, where they did it with 3 states, California, Oregon, and Washington. And it's all along 101 or the Pacific Coast Highway, meaning Highway 1, all the way up north. It's great. So even though you have a lot of states here exhibiting, you should start talking to each other, have a conversation. There's a lot of things you can do together that you're not being able to do by yourself. Now, you have a challenge. It's called big data. How many people understand big data? Right, nobody. Okay. I don't either. But I'll tell you what the airlines are trying to do, and it's going to affect your business. It's called customized airfares. They know a lot about you already. Because how many people here make your own reservations online? Okay, you're all losers. And I'm going to tell you why. Because the myth is, and believe me, it's a myth, that all the available inventory is online. Not even close. Only about 48%. So you're already disenfranchised from a majority of what's available to you because you get to do it at 3 in the morning in your bathrobe and you don't have to talk to anybody. How cool is that? Okay. So, guess what? When you go online, they're asking you for information. Maybe even your frequent flyer number because you're all frequent flyer junkies too. And now they know a lot about you. And now there's something called Resolution 787, and it has nothing to do with the Dreamliner. It's trying to get the airlines to be able to do something called customized airfares. And what that means is knowing what they know about you or what they think they know about you. And let's say you went to Sarasota, Florida last April. You'll get an email this week saying, hey, we got a great deal for you this year to go to Sarasota again because we know you went last year, and we're going to bundle in your hotel and your rental car, and it's a great deal. How do you know that? How do you know it's a great deal? You don't. In fact, chances are it's not. You've been upsold. And it takes all of you out of the mix. Here's the problem. They know not only when you went, they know how much money you spent, they know your gender, your sexual preference, they know who you went with. And they know that if you went with your significant other, you were more inclined to pay more money than if you went by yourself. They know time of year and seasonality. And if this happens, we're all in trouble. How many of you, since you all raised your hand when I asked if you booked online, have had this happen to you? By the way, I just went on CBS and talked about this, so I'm not sharing any secrets here. I had to qualify it. I'll explain that in a second. How many of you have gone online to research a fare, and let's pick one out of the hat, LA to New York in 3 weeks, and you found one for $350, and you thought, well, that's pretty good. Let me think about it. I'm going to come back in an hour. You know what's coming. You come back in an hour, and it's $410. Okay? Now, we know, and we basically acknowledge that the airlines update their fares 250,000 times a day. They've been doing it for years. I get that. So on a popular run like LA to New York, it's not only conceivable, I'll even give them the benefit of the doubt that you weren't the only one online looking for that fare. And the law of supply and demand kicks in. Let me tell you how I tested it. 2 months ago, I went online at 2 in the morning in New York and priced out a fare from LaGuardia to Des Moines in March on a Wednesday at 11 a.m. Okay? Got a fare of $280. Went back at 3 in the morning, and it was $330. Now, how many people at 2 o'clock in the morning in December are obsessed with Des Moines, Iowa in March on a Wednesday at 11 o'clock in the morning? So that experience alone and many others led me to say the following on CBS. So for those of you who still insist on researching and logging in to book your flights, if you want to research a fare online and you get one you like and you want to come back, use somebody else's computer. I'm not kidding. This is not just consumer information, it's also pricing information for you. So the good news is, in spite of all this, if you can control your airlift, you get to control prices. Because the airlines right now are now, for the first time, controlling their prices, controlling their inventory, and controlling their routes. Let me shift over for a second to cruise lines. You know, about 10 years ago, so about 2004, the cruise lines figured out that only about 12% of the adult US population had ever been on a cruise. And some moron, or maybe a committee of morons, interpreted that to mean that 77 or 87% wanted to go. So they commenced this massive, maniacal shipbuilding program, building so many ships that are so large, I'm convinced they've got high crime areas on board. And it takes 3 to 5 years for one of those babies to come out. And where did they come out? 2008, 2009. At the worst possible time. And talk about a buyer's market. It's still a buyer's market. The cruise lines really haven't learned their lessons. Carnival Cruise Lines last year, in the wake of the Triumph, one of the worst exhibits of bad public relations I've ever seen, was selling 7-night cruises for $149. You can't wake up in West Covina for $149. But that's a great opportunity for you to work with the cruise lines as an add-on for meetings, for groups, because they have berths to fill. But just like the hotels, just like the airlines, they're all taking their cue from each other. It's all about onboard revenue for them. It's all about ancillary fees. Everybody here in this room controls wallets. You can vote with them. You negotiate up front. How many people here are staying at the Westin Bonaventure? How many of you are paying for your Wi-Fi? Oh, we want to talk to you later. The point is, that's all negotiable. It has to be now. It's once again, the hotels trying to be competitive on rate, but they're not being competitive on value. The same thing applies to cruise lines. Be creative. Work with them. It's a buyer's market. You know what? They've got great new ships. They have great new experiences. They have great new ports. They don't all have to be, behemoths. They can have the smaller cruise lines as well. They're all out there, and they want your business, but you get to control what you do in the negotiation. So you want to think outside the box in terms of where you're going. You want to think no longer point to point. You want to think at least 1 or 2 additional destinations that you can bundle in. And then the path of least resistance. First of all, you're in control. Forget seasonality. My next book is called The Off-Season. It's the contrarian traveler's guide to where to go when everybody tells you not to. The off-season's a myth. It was started by a bunch of escaped garmentos in New York who were freezing their you-know-what's off about this time of year and decided, let's go to the Caribbean. And they did, and they still do. I'd much rather go to the Caribbean in June and July and August. I'd much rather go to Paris in February, March, and April. I'm not going to Paris to get a tan. And the temperature in the Caribbean in June, July, and August is only 4 to 5 degrees more. You're not standing in line. You're getting better service, and you're getting a better deal. Start doing that. Why? Because your customers are getting smarter. They're not tourists anymore. They're travelers. You know what the definition of a tourist is? Victim waiting to happen. You know what the definition of a traveler is? A tourist who's been victimized. Okay, we've all been victimized. We're all travelers. We know what we don't want. My audience is always saying to me something like this. We don't want to know that the sun is setting nicely in the Bahamas. We can figure that one out. We don't want to know that London's lovely. We got that. Tell us something we don't know. So for those of you who have access to public television, in addition to all the shows that I do on CBS, I have a new show out every week. It's called The Travel Detective on public television. And what do we tell you on that show? Which cruise ship is a floating fire trap? Which cruise ship isn't? Which hotel has a great safety program? Which hotel is most likely to get burglarized? Which airline needs to replace their planes? Which airline has a great fleet? The process of travel. That's important stuff. Because by the time people get to your motor coach, by the time they get to your destination, by the time they get to your experience, they've been beaten up. They've been abused about 47 times. And part of my job is to at least help them mitigate that abuse, if not eliminate it. So if you get a chance, catch the show. It's not about fluffiness. It's not about happy couples on the beach. In fact, we have a segment on our show every week. You know what it's called? Don't go there. We tell you where not to go. We change it every week. So that's one. The other thing I'm going to tell you about is a show that's going to air on public television. It's a special on March 6th. It's an unusual show. I've done it now for 14 years. We only do one every 2 years because they're so difficult to do. I go to individual heads of state. I get them to give me 6 days of their schedule completely free. We send their Ministry of Tourism home. We show up with a crew of 40, 8 helicopters, dive teams, motorcycle teams, mountain rappelling teams, horse and camel teams, dune buggy teams. And for the next 6 days, that head of state is my personal tour guide to the country for a 1-hour special. It's called the Royal Tour. No head of state is allowed to have editorial control. The Ministry of Tourism has no right of review. So on March 6th, we've done, the first one was the King of Jordan. Then we did the Prime Ministers of New Zealand and Jamaica, Presidents of Peru and Mexico. And on March 6th, this is unprecedented, we're doing the Royal Tour of Israel with Netanyahu. And you've never seen him do what he's about to do with me. It's pretty wild. We're going to have a premiere here in Los Angeles. He's coming. And then on March 6th it airs, so check your local listings, as they say. But that's proof positive that you can find different tour guides, if you look hard enough, that have a different perspective. And they actually have fun. And yes, we're talking about Palestinian homeland, and yes, we're talking about Syria and Iran, and then we're going swimming, and then we're going dune buggying, and then we're going rafting. If you've never seen Netanyahu swim on a bicycle, swim, comma, and on a bicycle, might be interesting to see. But it gets back down to one more thing, which all of you are here to do for the next 4 days, and that's simply this. Don't depend totally on social media. Don't depend totally on the internet. It's time to have a conversation again. My staff, all under the age of 35, if they were sitting where you are right now, they'd text me. Not good. The whole idea about successful travel happens when you talk to somebody, when you engage them, when you participate in the lost art of the conversation. And that's with a travel agent, with an airline, a hotel, not necessarily the internet. I can tell you time and time again how that's changed, not just for me, but for all of you. In your own personal travel experiences, the best experiences you had was when the plan didn't work and you had to talk to somebody else, and that's the next best friend you met. And when you're doing group travel, it's all about the conversation. It's not about isolation. The internet isolates us as community, it disengages us, and it doesn't allow us to really experience things. This is the time, with all the options we have out there, despite the airfares, despite the cuts in capacity, despite the nickel and diming, it's an opportunity for us to get outside the comfort zone, to have the conversation and experience all the things we're about to do. Because guess what? We have 75 or 74 million more people this year who are going to do that for the very first time. Are you ready for that? And it's not just about dealing with Cincinnati has air service. It's a question of not when they're going to travel, not if, but how. And that's where you guys come in. Thank you very much, guys. I really appreciate it.